Hola y bienvenidos. Hello and welcome to Una Palabra Sola, where we get to learn Spanish one word at a time. I'm your host, Megan Miller, founder and teacher at Aprovechar Language Solutions. Empezamos and let's dive in. Hola, hola, otra vez. Bienvenidos. Welcome back to Una Palabra Sola, a podcast where we get to learn Spanish one word at a time. I'm your host, Megan Miller, and today, one of the wonderful words out there that I have chosen es un sustantivo. It is a noun. Empieza con R. It starts with R. All you pirates out there, R. And it is very important to talk about because it is one of the biggest cultural differences between el mundo no hispanohablante y el mundo hispanohablante. So it's one of the biggest differences between not only the Spanish-speaking world versus the non-Spanish speaking world, which just sounds better in Spanish, but let's go ahead and get started. This word is something to keep in mind as you meet strangers, make conversation, travel, and this word is respeto or respect. So Aretha Franklin is going to roll over because I am going to try to spell it in Spanish. R-E-S-P-E-T-O. There's no C. So it's not respecto, it's respeto. And sometimes if you meet people, they might even quita la S or completely cut out the S and have respeto. So, respeto, what is it? This is respect. And one of the biggest challenges to learn is the difference between tú and usted in Spanish. Tú is your informal you versus usted is a very much more formal you. So in this episode, what we're going to do is talk about when to use tú versus usted and how really important respect is as a concept, as a cultural cornerstone. Basically, respect is everything in el mundo hispanohablante. So, la palabra otra vez, respeto or repeto, and that is R-E-S-P-E-T-O. It is a sustantivo, it is a noun, which means that it is el respeto. And the actual definition is respect, admiration, or esteem. So you get that kind of feeling of, if you hear me falta respeto, which is an example of how it's used, meaning I'm missing some respect here, like you need to respect me, that you can kind of tune your ears and be like, oh, something's about to go down. It's also used a little bit more formally, and I'm gonna sit up straighter in my chair, maybe stick a pinky out, with con el debido respeto, or con todo respeto. That's like with all due respect. It's very super formal, very, very formal. Or you can use con respeto a. So with respect to. And once again, a is just your preposition that means to. So, to, not tú. Very, very different here. So how it's used, me falta respeto, basically someone is putting up a warning sign or a little flare that's like, hey, you need to respect me. It's super formal. You might hear this in like, I don't know, Spanish court TV, or maybe a super telenovela or university course, con el debido respeto or con todo respeto. Or you could hear it con respeto a, which means with respect to. So this is another example of a word that in and of itself is not really used in conversation that much, but is a cultural concept. I definitely wanted to cover it today because I don't know about you, but I have been fielding a lot of questions about like tú versus usted. People are like, when to use which, Megan? And I'm like, well, it really depends. It depends on the context, the psychological safety of the environment. It depends on your relationship, how you perceive the relationship, how the other person perceives the relationship. And really, it is kind of a hairy thing, but it all comes down to respeto. It all comes down to respect. And because we have that concept of respect baked in, let's just go ahead and talk about it. So, as always, this is de Latin, from Latin, respectus. So, regard, consideration, looking back at. So, like, if I'm, going and trying to look back at something, I might respect it in Latin. I don't know. This is why I teach Spanish. Some synonyms are, por ejemplo, verbos cuidar, to take care of, preservar, to preserve. Some nouns, consideración, so consideration, basically, consideración. And then you also have respetuosamente, which means respectfully. So you might hear this, for example, in Downton Abbey, if you ever listen to it in Spanish. Respetuosamente, no voy. I respectfully decline. I'm not going to your party. Antonyms, this is where it gets super fun. You can have, this is what you might call a person who is really rude to you, grosero, or feminine, because we can be rude too, grosera. Or you can say mal educado or mal educada, which means badly educated, very upper crust, pinkies out, kind of, oh, you're so badly educated. It's just an example of the literal translation may not mean exactly what you want, but like if you say, no seas grosero, like don't be rude, or no, no seas grosera, don't be a rude, no seas maleducada, don't be a rude person. It doesn't necessarily literally make sense when you translate it, but it makes sense in the context, and it's a sign of fluency, guys, or craziness. I'm not really sure. Haven't gotten my test results back yet on that, but it is very much of that concept of stop being rude. Like if Rihanna was singing Rude Boy, she would say no seas grosero. Oh, oh, oh. You can also have grosería. So, grosería, descortesía, that's like discourtesy, it's rudeness, and that is just so grosero, grosera, maleducada, maleducada. Those were your adjectives that you can call people, but if you want to say that something is just, it's rude, it's a discourtesy, you would use grosería or descortesía. So one way that you can kind of have that related verb is this option of or this concept of tutear. So if you ever hear tuteame, it means use the tú with me, use that informal you with me, not the usted. Like we're good. We can use tú with each other. Also, a related verb is respetar or faltar respeto, or also obedecer. Obedecer means to obey. So respect, obey, like it's all kind of interrelated with that, be a good person, no seas grosero or grosera. Be a good person, not a rude person, and respect, certain things. So those feelings of respect, it's embedded in Latin culture. Really patriarchy, machismo are the two big things, along with respecting your elders. I think in the US, and once again, this is my opinion, so if you have different opinions, let me know. Feel free to comment, send me emails. Just don't say es grosero. Don't be that rude with me. But as an American white woman, what my opinions are is that in the US, everyone is much more on a level playing field. Like the generations, they keep fighting for who has the best ideas. And really, it's a competition that no one can win. But like Gen X and Gen Z and millennials and boomers and whoever else, like it's so weary. I'm so over it, but we continue to do it because that's the definition of insanity. And the respect your elders, yes, in the South, it's definitely, a big cultural standpoint. It's personally how I was always raised is like you respect your elders. But quite honestly, like once puberty hit, I'm like, no, we're all equal here. So it really depends, I think, on the individual nuclear family and how people grew up and what that perception of respect really is. But going into Latin culture, and this is once again observations, um, yes, feminism, like more casual culture, of course that exists in la cultura hispanohablante. Of course, honestly, those women may have better rights, probably do, than we do. But this is where kind of the words that we say or use matter, right? Respeto no es machismo. It's not that concept of machismo that the guy is paying the bill and opening the doors and the woman just sits and swoons on a fainting chair. It's not that machismo equals respect. It's simply a way that people show respect to each other. And for some men, that is more machismo qualities of I'm going to call you, I want to make sure that you're safe, I want to know where you are, what you're doing, who you're doing it with. To other people, like a woman, that might just mean oppression. So it really depends on that perception of respect. Because respect, once again, isn't the patriarchy, right? It's just how people have learned what those social norms are in this realm of respecting other people, respecting people of a certain status, respecting people of a certain age, of a certain, I don't know, look, right? Um, it's the world is different. I don't think that the worlds that we live in are like our parents' or grandparents' worlds, but those feelings of machismo, of patriarchy definitely persist, especially in Latin culture, where you would hear, for example, when I worked at a Dominican restaurant, the owner, el dueño, era dominicano, su mujer or su esposa era puertorriqueña. So I heard the two of them kind of arguing a lot. And she would always say, me falta respeto, me falta respeto. You don't know how much I do. And, whether that is an example of just a little domestic, of a little fight between two people that at the end of the day, they're married and they love each other, or that was indicative to, you know, decades of cultural oppression or, socioeconomic status or how they perceived the other to respect or faltar to kind of miss that respect of them. Um, that's up to you to decide. I don't really think that it matters too much. But just to know that this whole concept of respect, of respecting other people, respecting yourself, respecting, elders, things like that, spouses, it is definitely just in the veins of everyone in that Latin culture. Along with that, another observation, more and more people are using tú that I've seen. That's like online forums, that's comments, it's calls to action, that's in business as well. More and more people are rechazando, they are rejecting usted and they're using tú. And whether that's because they want to get closer to their consumer or they want to have that close relationship with their consumer or customer, or it's more indicative to, more informality, I guess, or less formality in the business world, it's once again, it's up to you because that's the perception, right? However, I think because all of this is subjective, the way that we show respect to other people or show deference to other people, that we defer to people that might be senior to us, or, physically abled versus physically disabled, mentally abled versus mentally disabled, any of those, like we want to show respect and we don't want to offend, right? That's this pesadilla que tenemos todos, that we don't want to offend somebody with our words, with our ignorance, essentially, is like accidentally offending someone. Like say you meet someone, you land in Panama City and you go to a bar and you meet someone there and you're chatting it up and you're kind of vibing together and they're getting along with you and you're like, yes, I want, a travel buddy, I want a pen pal, I want a Facebook friend, whatever that might be to you or for you. And then, this pesadilla, this nightmare that we all have, you accidentally offend them and then they're like, okay, we're done here. Like, there's nothing worse, I think, than losing someone who could be or used to be close to you, right? Like, we all have those ties to people that we really remember with fondness, and we don't want to offend them either with our words or with our ignorance. And this goes right into tú versus usted. So when I teach tú versus usted, there's a lot of questions. Quick guided tour. So if the person is younger than you, meaning like a child, I would use tú always. I personally cannot tell if a child could be between 4 and 16. I'm not sure, but basically if they are menor, if they are younger than me, I'll use tú. So I will use tú with children, and if the person is older than me, I will use usted. I personally always try to express caution when I'm meeting someone because there is that nightmare, right? Social anxiety is a real thing and it gets realer when you are trying to meet people in another language. So at the get-go, I will always use usted if it is someone older than me, like 40, 50, 60 up. If I'm approaching, a man in a park sitting at a bench for asking, and I'm going to ask him for directions, I'm going to be like, oh, ¿usted puede ayudarme? Like, can you help me? And I will just automatically throw that in there because I want to show deference. Respect to elders is a big thing, and I don't want to, have him say no if I accidentally used the tu form. So if that person is well known, meaning not like a celebrity, but like that person, I would say use tú also. So not only age, right? Younger tú, older usted, but also in that cercanía, that closeness of a relationship. So for example, I was meeting one of my students on Tuesday and he asked me something and he started with usted. And I was like, no, tutéame. Like we've been working together for almost a year. I know that he wants to show deference because I'm the profesora, I'm the teacher, but I'm like, no, we're on a level playing field here. Tutéame, right? So if that person, if the cercanía, if that closeness of the relationship is there, I would say use tú, versus if the person is a stranger, use usted. Also, for those that might be looking for work abroad, I would say if you're in a job interview, always usted. Always. And that is, once again, just showing that deference, right? I'm here interviewing for this company and I'm gonna use usted. But once again, right? Like keep keep feeling out the vibe. If you're like Google en Español, you might use tú because generally industry formality changes as well, right? If you're going for a finance job, Banco Santander, I'd say definitely use tú or definitely use usted rather there versus if you're like in a tech interview and if you would say in English like, hey, what's up? That is a tú moment versus like, yes, hello, I am here and usted. So if you are, and this is for all my travelers out there, if you're on the street, in the market, talking to the bartender, getting tacos from the taqueria, whatever, it depends. So, por ejemplo, I had a roommate who would always use usted with her mom. I've had other friends, same country, use tú with their mom, their grandma, all of their family. So I think really the first big takeaway is to listen to what other people are saying. Cuando estás en Roma, haga como los romanos, right? When you're in Rome, do as the Romans. So listen to what other people are saying, especially if it's like a vendor or a cashier. If it's a transactional relationship, do as the locals. Because you don't want to be stuffy formal and therefore kind of stick out, right? You don't want to come in and say, okay, I'm ready to use do for you, Carrefour cashier or something. Um, you also just don't want to be offensive. So listening to other people, especially locals, is going to be helpful. Quite honestly, anytime that I'm in a new country that is Spanish speaking, I'm going to take the first, like, I don't know, half a day that I'm there and just kind of walk around and see things and hear things and just be a sponge. I do not tell people to be SpongeBob SquarePants that often, but just be a sponge. Sé una esponja, because that is going to be helpful as you kind of get into the swing of what the locals are saying or what the locals are using. And also, it's good for accents and dialects, right? So southern Spain is going to be different than Madrid, which is going to be different than Argentina, which is going to be different than, you know, or literally anywhere else. Seriously. So first big takeaway, listen to the locals, especially if it's like a transactional relationship. Like if you are a regular at a bar and you know the bartender and you know you're at a good kind of equal to a two relationship, that's one thing versus like a stranger coming into the bar. They might be in that usted relationship because they're like, I don't know. Do you really know how to make a Manhattan, or are you just kind of playing with me? So it really depends on that perception of the relationship and the overall kind of perception of how important respect is to you versus that person. The other big takeaway, the second big takeaway, is to ask. So, especially if it is a one-on-one relationship or one-on-one conversation, like, ¿qué debo utilizar? ¿Tú o usted? Is a very easy way to just get it out in the open. So, I was talking earlier about like social anxiety, which, yes, I feel a lot. And if you're feeling anxious about the conversation, yes, you can mirror, right? The stranger uses tú, so you might use tú, or the stranger, or that person that you're meeting with, might have very open body language and leaning into the camera, and so you want to also have open body language and lean into the camera as well. Like you don't want to be all closed off and have, your arms in front of you like a bouncer. So mirroring is great, but if you're feeling too much like a stranger in a strange land, just ask the fucking question. Like, you could also use ¿qué prefiere tú o usted? So, por ejemplo, when I was in New York doing my DELE exam, and there's the last part is speaking. So you have to give a presentation, and then there's you have to talk about the theme, and then you have to do kind of informal conversation. Every single person that I met with from Instituto Cervantes always asked me, ¿qué prefiere tú usted? And that was wonderful because I'm like, yeah, we can use usted, but like it has been 8 hours that I've been thinking and like bleeding in my brain in Spanish, so we're just gonna use tú. Also, in my experience, tú is used a lot more in Spain, just in general. When I was in Spain, granted that was years and years ago, tú was used a lot versus usted or ustedes. It was always tú or vosotros, vosotras. So they keep it more on that informal kind of level, right? But if you are always like, if you're meeting someone specifically in Latin America, Caribbean, I mean, good God, there are 33 countries, 33 Spanish-speaking countries. Like, that's a lot of options. And you have this kind of mental churn in the back of your head, like, oh no, I don't want to offend. Which one should I use, do or instead? Just fucking ask. Because it is not worth having that churn in the back of your head going, okay, like, sit up straight and don't do anything offensive, and how do you conjugate that verb? Like it's a lot. That's why we get so exhausted speaking Spanish and practicing Spanish for an hour, 2 hours, 5 days at a time, because you're constantly and kind of in the back of your head, in the front of your head, going, okay, how do I want to respond? What do I want to say? How can I make sure that, I'm perceived the way that I would want? And then how can I also pick up on them? And, being sensitive and a stranger in a strange land is exhausting. So one other thing that really that question, like, ¿qué debo usar? Or ¿qué debo utilizar? Or ¿qué prefiere? The one other beautiful thing about asking that question and just get it out in the open shows that you are ready to use either. So los Hispanohablantes know that this is a little bit of a head scratcher for us non-native speakers. And quite honestly, for me, the easy thing to do is just to ask, get it out in the open, and then giggle about it later. Like, figure out how the person wants to be addressed, get through the conversation, and then later take a big deep breath and know that you did your absolute best. With that, though, because there are two different ways to say you in Spanish, be sure to conjugate the verbs correctly. So you don't want to be using usted and then give a tu command, or vice versa, because it's just confusing. So when I had the chance to interview some native Spanish speakers, and I always ask them, like, what's the most difficult part of speaking with or dealing with non-natives? I was like, gringas como yo, like white people like me, what's the worst thing? And everyone's answer across the board, so multiple countries, multiple levels, they were all like, verbs. You guys need to get your verbs in order. So if you do decide to use tu, make sure that that tu is all the way across the board. You're using tu in the past, in the present, in the future, as a command, whatever, however you might use tu, versus usted, which is very much of a make sure that you use usted in the past, in the present, in the future, and as a command. And if you do need that verb help, check out the Deseo program. So we are opening for another cohort soon. So verbs are one of those things. Everyone hates them, everyone loves them, everyone needs them. So no matter how you feel about verbs in Spanish, don't worry. We're all just trying to do our best and get through them. And a lot of that is rote memorization, which I can help with. So back to verbos, or more or less respect, right? You might be asking, well, why? Why is there this informal tú and then this formal you, and then even like the informal vosotros that's used in Spain, which means like y'all, or the more formal ustedes that is spoken literally everywhere else and it means you all? Why? Well, queridos, because Spanish comes from Latin, and it has been historically important to have verb conjugations for two different pronouns, and because some people were royalty and they needed to be addressed differently. So, like I said earlier, kind of tune your ears if you hear like, oh, me falta respeto, or con respecto a, because that's a big sign that you need to pay attention. But respect in and of itself is not really used that much. It's more of a concept. And that idea of respect has kind of changed, right? Because with the internet, royalty isn't so much of a concern now because we're all plebeians. Somos iguales. We're all equal. So instead of getting hung up on tú versus usted, think about how you can best respect the person in front of you. How can you show that respect to the person that you are doing conversation with, that you're doing classes with, however and wherever you're jugando con español, wherever you're playing with Spanish? It doesn't necessarily matter all of the mental churn of like, oh no, do I need to conjugate that verb? And oh no, did I use tu or usted? And what's that verb conjugation in the past? And oh, the conversation has moved, and what kind of vocabulary do I need to keep up? Like, I'm rocking back and forth because it's a lot, right? It's a lot of mental churn. So take a deep breath and focus on the person in front of you. That means having your order ready at a taqueria. It means to not stare at your phone. It means to be present, to make the right amount of eye contact, blink once in a while, listen to understand, not respond. And really, more than anything, be open to connection. Because con todo respeto a la humanidad, all this respect to humanity, really what we want and what we desire more than anything is to connect with other people, to connect with intention, to connect with confidence and competence. We want to be perceived as someone who is a buena persona, who's a good person. We want that to be kind of how others perceive us, but then we also want to connect with other buenas personas, other good people. So when in doubt, tira todo. Throw out all the shit that you got in your head and take a deep breath and focus on the person in front of you. If you need them to slow down, you can say, más despacio, por favor. Intento escuchar, pero no estoy buena, right? I'm trying to listen, but I'm not there yet. If someone is talking about something and you're like, do we really need to be talking about access to abortions in Spanish and with the concept of Latin American countries? You can ask to change the conversation topic, or you can just totally change it on them and see what happens, right? So it's more about focusing on the person in front of you, focusing on the relationship and the connection, the opportunities for connection, than it is in any way to show deference or respect or to utilize debido respeto a, right? Like you don't need to memorize these super formal phrases or memorize, the little mind map of tú or usted. Like just ask. Ask and then move forward. Because if you are open to that connection, other people will understand that. And any of those little offenses that happen, because they happen to us all, right? I could tell you stories that could make both of us blush a lot. They happen to us all, and that's okay, because that is all part of learning and practicing and speaking and existing in another language. So for those that are having that ack feeling, and they want to feel more comfortable and confident in Spanish, check out my monthly program called Deseo at deseospanishprogram.info. Y también check out the show notes, transcript, request a word, or be on the show. Check out aprovechar.me. All right. Hasta la próxima vez. Until next time, un abrazo fuerte.